Hello and welcome back to episode 3 already of Chiff Chat, the organ podcast with me, Ben Bloor. Hope everyone's having a good Wednesday 24th of April 2024, and if you're listening to this after that, what's it like living in the future? Do we have flying cars yet? Do we have flying organs yet? Well, if the organs are airborne or sedentary, either way, I hope you're having a good day. I need to do a bit more planning for these intros, sorry. Right, let's begin this week by diving into my Santa's sack of emails. You might remember that last week I mentioned a restaurant in Arizona where someone had the incredible idea to combine pizzas and organs. It's called Organ Stop Pizza, which the more I think about it, it really bothers me. I can't work out what it means. Is it a play on words? I mean, I get you eat pizza there and there's a huge theatre organ that plays while you eat, but why Organ Stop Pizza? I mean, I know what an organ stop is, but what's that got to do with maybe I'm overthinking it, I don't know. Anyway, one brave soul who calls himself Dan has sent an email all the way from Ontario, Canada to podcast@chiffchat.com and says that he's been there. He writes, "Hi Ben, just starting to get into episode 2 of the podcast. It's brilliant and has changed my life." He didn't write that, I added that bit in, but that's what he meant to write. Regarding Organ Stop Pizza, I went back in 2009 when organist Lou Williams was one of the organists there. The organ was awesome, pizza was good, and the beer was cold as well. I'd talked to Lou while I was there, and I think nowadays he's retired from playing at OSP, but we still do keep in touch. I'd highly recommend it. It's definitely the place to go if you want to hear some good theatre organ and have some pizza as well. A friend of mine went there for the second time this year, 2 years in a row, and he liked it both times. Well, that sounds like a ringing endorsement to me. We definitely need more wholesome mashups of two good things in the world, don't you think? Organs and pizzas, harmoniums and flatbreads, pedal pianos and quiche. Anyway, I've got another email here on the subject of a game of Name That Organ Stop I played with Richard McVeigh back in episode 1 a few weeks ago. You'll remember that we tried to find a stop name for every letter of the alphabet, but we struggled with the letter A. Anyway, here's an email from someone claiming to be called Chaz. "Hi Ben, thought I'd help add to the A's for the organ stop list. I found myself shouting out loud one of the following stops when you started the list, much to the confusion of the joggers who were passing me at the time." Can I just interrupt this email and say that I don't endorse going onto the streets and shouting organ stop names? You might end up frightening people or getting punched. Anyway, Chaz continues. "There is an organ in Studio 1 of Bratislava Radio in Slovakia. I can't find out who built it. However, there is an Acuta, a 4-rank mixture stop, and also 2 instances of an Alikvoti, also a mixture stop, 1 of 3 ranks and 1 of 5 in the pedal." Thanks very much for your email, Chaz. I've heard of an Acuta mixture before, but not the other one. Honestly, I don't know where they come up with the names for these things. You did pique my interest, and I had to look up the Bratislava Radio building. It's called the Pyramid, and it's an enormous upside-down, pyramid, really. It's a really weird design for a concert hall. Interestingly, I notice it holds the dual accolade of Building of the Century in its native Slovakia, but also one of the top 30 ugliest buildings in the world. Perhaps you can have a look and let me know what you think. Or just send me anything, really. Do get in touch to podcast@chiffchat.com. Today's special guest, much like last week, is a bit of a talker. It's all I could do to get a word in edgeways, to be honest. But he's incredibly knowledgeable, personable, energetic, and I think you'll really enjoy today's episode. A little reminder that if you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast, feel free to chuck us a few quid on TipJar. You'll find the link in the description. I do have a crippling addiction to Pringles, so you can rest safe in the knowledge that you'll be funding that. Now, I'm not totally sure, but if you squint your ears really hard, you should just about be able to make out a podcast. Oh yeah, there it is, over there in the distance. Go on, see if you can catch it. Go on. Hello, you've made it onto the podcasty bit of the podcast, and it's really strange. It suddenly feels like there's a lot more energy in the room. My guest today has been at the forefront of both performance and teaching in the UK for a number of years, and he's currently head of organ at the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. He's starred in several highly praised documentaries about the organ, and has been described as one of the finest organists of our time. He's possibly the most eccentric man I've ever met, and every time I meet him for more than about 5 minutes, I have to go and have a 3-hour nap. Welcome to Chiff Chat, Daniel Moult.
Thank you, Ben, for the invite.
Well, thanks for coming in on what's probably one of the coldest days of the year so far. How have you been?
I've been well, thank you. Yeah, it's crazy time of year for us all, but surviving. Yeah,
good. So as you can see, and for the benefit of the listeners, here we are recording this in Abbey Road Studios in the same room the Beatles recorded Here Comes the Sun, I think. No, of course not. No, we're in my pokey old office in a basement in London. Let me just say, every expense has been spared to make you feel welcome, Dan.
I appreciate it.
I've got a few things to ask you about, but let's start by saying that I've known you in several different capacities over my life. First of all, as a mentor on various organ courses when I was a teenager, and now later on in life as a work colleague. You've been on the pedagogical scene for years and years, and that's not wanting to make you feel old or anything.
Thank you. Yes.
But, I'm only saying
Are you failing there?
But I'm only saying it because you've surely seen hundreds of kids rise through the ranks over the years on organ courses, and because of your energy and personality, I mean, I dare say a lot of people will have been really inspired to continue their organ studies. In terms of your energy, how do you do it? What are you on, and can I have some?
I sometimes amaze myself, but I guess like a lot of people who keep themselves busy, when I crash. I just find myself staring at a wall. And I think like a lot of musicians, you find the adrenaline, you find something inside you that just propels you through, don't you? Because and I think when you're teaching, and particularly when you're enthusing people, whether that's adult non-professionals or young people, there's an expectation that you're really giving heart and soul to it. And yeah, I guess it can be tiring, but also, sounds terribly American this, but you get something back. There is a reward of working with people who will benefit from whatever insight you can give and whatever steer you can give. And for me, that's just an enormous reward. I find it, it sort of gives an altruistic buzz to what I do. So maybe I'm completely selfish, but
not at all. So on that point, I do some teaching myself now, and I think teaching makes you, as the teacher, a better performer.
Definitely.
Because when a student plays you a piece, you have to connect with their performance, assess it, actively engage with technical matters and musical interpretation, and provide feedback, obviously. And I suppose, depending on how well the student has performed the piece, it can strengthen your own convictions in how you play the piece. And it's really nice when this happens. You can think, oh, maybe I'll reconsider how to approach that passage next time I play this.
Absolutely. And I love being, as I'm sure you do, Ben, I love being challenged by students that you're teaching something, and then suddenly a way that you've seen something that to you seems the only way, and it's suddenly challenged by somebody playing it differently, maybe an intelligent question at the right moment, and suddenly, you start to justify some of your own baggage that you've accumulated through the years. And I think as musicians, we can all hold on to hobby horses, can't we? And the wonderful thing about teaching, particularly perhaps at a more experience level, is that it makes you question a lot of those assumptions, makes you question what you do. There's also a slight feeling of hypocrisy as well. I remember the other day, somebody was playing very nicely, but it was just a passage which needed tidied up. And I said, no, like this. And I went to demonstrate. It's an absolute car crash because I'd not practiced for 2 days. And that's both a humility check and it's also this realization that, if you are teaching very talented young people for the next generation, it's a sort of imperative to keep on top of it yourself, I think.
Yeah. No, I mean, when I worked with Edward Higginbottom, he would ask you to do crazy things with transposing and score reading and all that kind of stuff, but he'd never ask you to do something he couldn't do himself. I think that's really important to bear in mind.
Is what I was talking to somebody else about this the other day, interestingly, and we're saying at what point when you are regarded in your profession as a sort of elder statesperson, at what point is it okay not to be able to do it yourself and that you just act as a great guru? I'm looking forward to that day if I ever arrive there. So people don't turn up at my concerts and say, oh, I see. Yeah, it's all talk.
So you invited me to teach on an organ course this last summer, so I feel like I've come full circle now. I mean, I vividly remember the organ courses I attended as a student, and it was really interesting being on the other side of the fence. I really enjoyed it. There are loads of courses out there, but this particular one was run by the RCO, which I know you're heavily involved in. They put a lot of focus on the keyboard skills aspect of being an organist, so transposition, sight reading, score reading, harmonisation. Why is so much weight given to this aspect, and what are the practical benefits of being fluent in these skills, which can often seem a bit abstract?
Yes, and I guess just to come at it from another angle, I mean, the world has changed so much, hasn't it? musical world obviously included, since those tests were at the core of education. Things like transposing, I mean, how easy it is now to run something through Sibelius and get it printed out at a different pitch, how easy it is to create reductions of things online, and so on and so forth. And there are times when I wonder whether the skills are, in purely practical terms, still absolutely the essentials perhaps that they were even 40, 50 years ago. But I think there's something more important at heart there, which is about general musicianship. And I think that even if you have to sweat at those skills, and I did at most of them, the very fact that you have a basic competence to transpose and to read a score in a rehearsal, and to turn a piece of music around very quickly after less than optimal study time. All those things the RCO diplomas check, they do make you a better musician. And I have to say, nowadays, I hardly use any of those skills at all. Can't remember the last time I score read in public. Yeah, because I don't do very much church work. I think they are church cathedral based.
Well, I was going to say, I think I use those skills on a daily basis.
That's fantastic. And I do think in the profession still they're used a lot. I say I personally don't. But even though I might never use some of them again, potentially, I don't begrudge having gone through that.
I'm sure you're glad to.
Because, exactly. It's just part of you being a holistic musician. You know, it's like the old adage you say to your organ students, please will you go and listen to the Franck Piano Quintet rather than yet another performer playing the chorales. You know, we try and make our students broad, you know, to give them broad frames of reference, don't we? And for me, keyboard skills is another side of that. And I can't claim I was ever any genius at them. I wasn't. But I think it's good for all of us to have some level of them to open up our musicianship,
Right, now I don't want this conversation to get too boring.
I'm boring myself, Ben, so let's move on.
But, I mean, there may be some people listening to this, unlikely.
Never know.
People who are in the
your mum?
She
mentioned your mum? Yeah,
she might tune in,
There may be some people listening to this who are in the sixth form, and seeing as you've seen firsthand the differences between the conservatoire route and maybe an organ scholarship at university, what sort of experiences can people expect from each?
Okay, well, I can obviously speak more confidently with the conservatoire experience. I've been heading up the organ department at Birmingham now for just over 6 years, I think it is. And I think the two they're not mutually exclusive. I remember when I was sort of 17, 18, you had to make a choice. Did you go to conservatoire? Did you go to universities to study as a musician? And they tended perhaps to attract rather different sorts of musicians. Whereas I think now that line, I'm glad to say, has become blurred. So now you'll get people who want to go to university but will come to conservatoire either in a gap year just to sharpen up on their skills, or who will go to conservatoire after university to also sharpen up on the skills that they've not had a chance to do in situ in an organ scholarship. So they offer different things. I think because people study for longer now, I think people tend to do both directions, don't they? People who come to conservatoire instead of university for a undergraduate degree, I think also get a very different experience from even 20 or 30 years ago. I think academically things are a lot sharper. You know, there was always a bit of a sense that conservatoires were for musicians who didn't want to engage at all with anything except playing their instrument. And they've changed a lot. And you're now, I think it's fair to say, all of the UK conservatoires I'm aware of, you'll get to a different degree, really good grounding in harmony, counterpoint, basic aesthetics, history. And maybe it might not be as extensive as a typical Ivy League university, but it will be enough there to give a working musician enough power and muscle to be teaching and performing and thinking and editing with confidence. And I think the profession's changed, because I think when you look at people in top jobs, there are as many conservatoire people as there are university people. That's definitely a change, I think, for the better. So I think, people would hopefully leave conservatoire a really well-rounded musician, even if they never stepped foot in the door of a university, because that's our job to do that.
Well, you're doing fantastic work at Birmingham. This is by no means an advert for the place, but it's a cracking department. You're turning out some brilliant players, you and Nick Wern. And of course, it's an exciting time because you've got some new organs being built. Can you tell us?
I can tell you what I can, yeah. So when we moved to the new buildings about 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh, do you still use the Curzon building, the one that looks like a swell box on the outside?
as in the Curzon
There's a
library.
library.
Yeah. That's so all the conservatoire and half of the RCO collection is in Curzon. Yeah,
Okay.
so that's
Sorry,
no, that's fine. Yeah. The building's still there, and it's got a better canteen for the conservatoire as well. So
It's not been knocked down for HS2.
not yet. No, HS2. The great upset with HS2 is that they've closed my favourite pub for Woodman. I know, it's just by Curzon Street Station, which is where Mendelssohn, when he visited Birmingham several times, Mendelssohn loved Birmingham. He came about 4 or 5 times, and his train would have pulled into Curzon Street. So every time I walk past it, I think, wow, there's that very real link with history. HS2 sort of slowly progressing. Whatever you think of the politics of it, it will be good for us at the conservatoire because it's less walk.
Definitely.
So I'm looking forward to that. It'll be about 7 minutes less walk, which when you're as unfit as I am, that's important.
Anyway, New Orleans.
Oh yes, sorry, New Orleans. I'm terrible at digression. It's going to be the longest, most boring podcast ever with lots of diversions. So New Orleans, So when we moved site about 5 or 6 years ago, we took with us a few practice organs that we had, but we'd always been wanting more significant organs, and then it was a multi-million-pound donation about 4 or 5 years ago that enabled that. So we've got a new Flentrop for Wolfson organ, which has been opened last year, which is settling in wonderfully. We're about to have a new William Drake organ, which is coming in next year in the spring, summer. That's in an English romantic style. That's 1920 stops or so. Then we've got a wooden mean tone organ for Bird and Gibbons and Frescobaldi and Rossi and all those sorts of corners of the repertoire.
Stroking his beard.
Yes, he's stroking his beard. We'll be asking you to open it, Ben. That's coming a bit later on in 24. We're getting a new clock practice organ with a 16-foot sub bass backstage in the practice rooms. And then finally, we're talking about a symphonic organ, which is going in the main hall, which is exciting. That's a very slow burn because we've got structural engineers and acousticians and 51 committees. And that will be electro-pneumatic action, divided either side of a stage, mobile console, 50 stops, 32 foot under open wood under the stage, I'm hoping, and something sort of symphonic. So that's in a nutshell what's happening. So it's exciting but busy because all this is on top of the teaching and the usual admin. So
One of my questions was going to be picking the style of a new organ being built in a conservatoire that's going to be taught on for decades to come is a massive responsibility, but it sounds as if you've got the market sewn up in terms of different styles.
that's kind. I mean, in an ideal world, if space and money were no object, which of course they both always are, we'd have 20 different organs. We'd have a Ladegast copy for Brahms and Reubke, and we'd have a Zauer, we'd have a Cavaillé Collins, so the list would go on, and right down to Spanish Baroque and so on. But it's trying to make intelligent choices so that we can teach and practice a large cross-section of a repertoire. That's never going to be wholly authentically unless you have 20 odd organs. But we've given it a lot of thought, and I've made sure I've spoken to people so that my own preferences, if you like, aren't the driving factor. This has to be something which is future-proof, and I've taken a lot of advice. And you do feel the weight of responsibility. I would hate to think that in 50 years, when I'm in my retirement home, if I make it to then, that somebody will be furiously, questioning some of my decisions. So I hope it's
Still on the teaching side of things, part of what you do as well is give talks and workshops about good practice technique and coping with nerves, which I know involves mental preparation and breathing exercises. Is it breathe in for 4 and out for 6?
Yes, it's 4-2-6. It's in for 4, hold for 2, out to 6. It's a magic pin code there.
There's a phrase you use that it's always stuck with me. It takes 7 repetitions to learn a pattern correctly, but 30 repetitions to correct a mistake. Is that really true?
Yeah, somebody picked me up on this the other week, actually. A rather indignant lady. She said, "I don't believe it." And I said, well, I agree with you that it's, to me as a musician, it feels like more than 7 repetitions, particularly if you're doing more demanding music. And can I just say, listeners, do check out Ben's Chiff chat on the most difficult organ music. Very, very interesting. I did my preparation last night, you see, got sent into that. And you asked that very interesting question, Ben, what is difficult? Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? One thing I've learned to say as a teacher, or try to avoid saying as a teacher, I might add, is this piece is difficult or this is challenging, because you put an expectation there. And I found over the years that all of us, because we're all wired differently, we find very different things difficult. So it's a really, the use of language when you teach is so important. So important. You can just change somebody's experience for better or worse by just being a little bit clumsy with your phraseology. So I think, teaching's a huge responsibility. So to come back, anyway, sorry, there's another digression. Yeah, I hope everyone's still there. Coming back to the 7 repetitions, I think it's more than that in difficult music. I can believe the 30 repetitions to get rid of a false memory. This isn't my statistic, by the way. This was from a neurologist. It's a very interesting book I've got at home, which I don't understand most of, but it was written by a neurologist who was investigating muscle memory from a purely scientific viewpoint, and did lots of interesting research with his colleagues and came up with that sort of suggestion from his findings. But it makes the point that I think when we're learning patterns, we try and do everything to be as accurate as possible. And I say that as somebody who, has some pretty dire practices sometimes, but I try and just remind myself of that need to be accurate early on, because I think it just saves so much stress further down the road when you're perfecting things and when you eventually come to put them in public. Yeah.
Very quickly, you studied abroad in the Netherlands with Jacques van Ortmassen. Did you choose to go there because of him or the organs?
It was primarily because of Jacques, actually, because I think, I'm sure you found this, Ben, in your own career, that there's a very special chemistry sometimes between students and teacher. And sometimes you'll have even just 5 minutes with somebody and you think, this is absolutely the teacher for me. And sometimes you'll have the exact opposite as well. And it's such an amalgam of things, isn't it? It's personal chemistry. I think there's no denying that, just that purely animal sense of who we get on and who we don't. It's musical chemistry as well, that we all have different musical personalities, and some of us gel better with other colleagues than others for that reason. It's all sorts of things. And I just remember I was coming to the end of my not terribly happy 3 years as an organ scholar in Oxford, and I had an organ lesson in my last few months there with Jacques, who was visiting as a John Betts Fellow. And I just knew within 5 minutes, I thought, you are absolutely the teacher for me. And particularly at that stage where I was, there were just so many nirvana moments in what he was saying. And so for me, that was the decision. And to be honest, I think I would have gone regardless of the organs. The organs were a highlight and they taught me a lot. But it was Jacques' teaching which was very special, and I think very different from perhaps a lot of the teaching which was around at that time in the UK. Yeah. And I say at that time because I think things have changed, and I think teaching has become more emotionally aware, and I think it's become, to use the buzzword, more student focused. I think maybe when I was a lad, it was a little bit of an old school, get on with it, and very little empathy or advice for critical things like good practice, how you practice, anxiety, or all these universal things that nearly all musicians have to address. And I found with Jacques, although I'm not saying he had all the answers, and he'd be the first to admit that, but he was engaging with things like that, and partially just in the tone of how he taught. You would just suddenly see things a different way, and just performing became a different thing as well. He was an inspirational teacher, and a very sad loss that he went well before his time back in 2015, I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah.
Brexit notwithstanding, would studying abroad be something you recommend to young organists?
Yeah, absolutely. And I say to some of the undergraduates at Birmingham, right, you've probably had enough of me. It's now time to go off and spread your wings and look abroad. I'm delighted if they stay on, obviously, and do a master's with us and what have you, and help the attendance figures. But that's not what we're about. We're about the student. And yes, I would strongly encourage that. For some of them, it's not the right move. And some of them also just want to go straight into the profession, particularly those who've done big gap year cathedral scholarships might just want to go on and do another cathedral scholarship and get on that circuit quickly. But I do say to them, think wisely, because for the sake of 1 or 2 years of your life, which in the grand scheme of things is not very much, actually that is the time to really absorb lots of ideas, lots of teaching, and you're going to find it difficult if at the age of 30, 35, you suddenly think, I'd really like to have gone and done that.
It's a big regret of mine that I never did any study abroad.
Is it really, Ben?
Yeah, because I just thought, and it's a really stupid reason, I just thought, I'll miss home too much.
No, I think it's a very human response, but I always think it's never ultimately too late. And I can think of another professional colleague who I have immense respect for, who said exactly the same to me last year, and he said, I'm really sorry that I missed out on that particular boat. And I said to him, but you can, in a way, you come from a stronger position when you're older, because you can cherry pick what you do. You can say, right, I'm going to take that repertoire to that person as a sort of professional session, and I'm going to go and watch that person teach. And you can create your own curriculum with the benefit of being a bit older and a bit savvier. I guess it's harder with time and so on, but, maybe professional development should never stop. I mean, I'm aware that, particularly from my teaching, I need to keep abreast of ideas. I love watching other people's teaching. I will learn things from that. I have to stay completely open to that. And I think all of us as musicians, we should obviously never stop learning. It's a cliche, but it's so true. So, good luck to your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Let's move on to your glittering Hollywood career.
Thank you, darling.
You've been involved with Will Fraser at Fugue State Films and recorded loads of documentaries, all of which are very interesting, informative, and super high quality. Not just in the production side of things, but obviously you're playing too. There's a fantastic one, which I've got a copy of, but not yet watched, with Martin Schmading, about bark and expression. But I've recently been dipping into the English organ DVD. Was it fun trekking all over the place?
It was fantastic. It was both exhausting and mad. And, waking up in another flea pit hotel to save money. to go something like, I can't remember the exact thing, Liverpool to York to Newcastle or something, all in 2.5 days. I'm too old now, Ben. I've got a big birthday in a couple of weeks, and it ain't 40. So I'm glad I did it when I did, before I was too old and knackered and too grey. But
well, you got a trip to Australia out of it.
I got a trip to Oz. We did New Zealand, which I'm not. I've been to Australia before, but I've not been to New Zealand, so that was fine. I had a great time. And I have to say, there's so many highs. I mean, purely, just the joy of doing it, but also, just incidental things. I had the best ever goat curry in New York. Goat's curry. I can recommend. Just sensational. But it was so strong, you couldn't taste the goat. I'm a bit like Kevin, a bit like Kevin Bowyer. For me, a good curry, you don't really taste the meat. Yeah. It's just all in the chili. It was, I was just hallucinating for days afterwards. It was a lovely experience, and it was a lot of fun. And but I think, I'm not sure I'd quite have the energy to sort of bring something quite of that scale off again. It's sort of a younger person's project. I think.
An amazing undertaking. England's often known abroad as the land without music. Organ music's obviously just a subsection of that. But did you find that to be true after your extensive research into the instruments?
No. And what's interesting is, I think, and you find this in other areas culturally as well, that often in England we're our own worst enemies, and that we see our weaknesses, we see our limitations culturally, and we almost celebrate them. Whereas when you go particularly to countries like Germany, Scandinavia, continent, and the States and so on, and they love our culture. And I was in Leipzig teaching recently, and they all want to play Whitlock. And they are all. So, I guess you must get so tired of hearing Whitlock. You say, well, actually, I think I've taught us about once in England in the past year. And yet they appreciate the best of our English organ culture in the same way that we'd relish Cargala, they relish Whitlock, in the same way that we might enjoy Muffat or Froberger, then they enjoy Purcell and Locke. So there's a lot more open-mindedness, I think, outside England. But I think the next generation are more open to English repertoire as well. I think there is a change. And I did worry, actually, after Brexit, where there was so many not very pleasant sort of nationalistic aspects to Brexit, whatever your politics on it are. I was worried that there might be a backlash and people would feel embarrassed, if you like, to celebrate things of Britain. But it doesn't seem to have dented it. If anything, it's increased, but in a healthy, not a jingoistic way. And I think that's true of English culture generally, I think.
Did you have a favourite organ on that documentary? It's probably the Brompton Oratory, right?
Yes, Brompton Oratory was head and shoulders. And then after that, oh gosh, I could do 2 or 3, I think. Sydney Town Hall. It's just sensational. And with no disrespect to Andrew Post, who is just a fantastic tonmeister, you do have to be in the room. It's one of those organs that never quite makes it on CD. Some organs are like that, aren't they? They're just far better in the building, and it's a whole complex of reasons. Sydney's one of them. It's just fantastic, and they're really proud of it. The Sydney Siders, it's great. They have a really good town hall series where all the shoppers and local people and non-specialists come and hear the organ every week, which is just fantastic. That was a highlight, and after that, possibly Truro Cathedral, which is a bit of a cliche. Just fantastic organ. Oh, the Schultzer in Armley as well. Yeah, those are probably the top three, but it's very subjective, and I mean even the less exciting organs were wonderful. I mean, there's not a dud on them. I have had one or two slightly barbed emails saying, why didn't you come to our church/university because we have an XYZ? And it's not just about the best organs. It was about trying to tell a story and trying to find organs that hadn't been altered, that had a big geographical spread as well, so that we didn't look too focused on Southern England. There were so many aspects that came together that it wasn't just that organ's better as that. It was a whole factor of things. So I apologise for anybody who finds their favourite instrument wasn't there.
No,
but
Well, it all hangs together really well. I'm always interested in the behind the scenes of these kind of film shoots. I love the way there has to be a panning shot of you walking into a building or looking out of a window wistfully.
Most of the times we're just trying not to wet ourselves with laughter when we do those, because it's so studied and it's so artificial. And I guess unless you're a professional actor or presenter and you're doing that sort of thing day in, day out, it just feels terribly artificial. Yeah. But it's part of the as we would say, part of the fun of making it. Sometimes when you're doing that stuff, it's just deathly dull. I got very good at walking with a sort of mock serious expression. I can do that very well. It's a good, when the charade stripe on Christmas Day, I might do that in front of the family just for a bit of entertainment, just walking and, locking a door. Yeah, I'm getting good at that.
We always finish the interview section with a quick fire round. So, Dan, I'm going to throw a load of questions your way and just tell me the first thing that pops into your head.
Is this career-ending stuff, Ben?
Yeah, it is.
Right, here we go. Favourite organ?
Groningen, Martini Keck.
Good choice.
Yeah, just in close second, folks, is Alkmaar, Lawrence Keck, but it doesn't quite make it. There we go. That'll upset someone.
Favourite organ composer?
J.S. Bach. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no one ever says John Stanley.
I do love John Stanley. Yeah. Okay. Second.
Favourite performer, alive or dead?
Ben Blore, goes without saying. Is anybody narcissistic enough to save themselves? I sincerely hope not. No, that is a joke. But please, no, please. That is a heavy irony. So just to make that clear, probably okay. Joking aside, Pete Kay. On balance, not for everything, but just there's partially nostalgia here. I just remember growing up with some of his Bach recordings in my early teens and just being bowled over by the musicianship. And, okay, maybe now we don't think it's the last word in stylistic awareness, but just the force of his musical personality really won me over as a player.
Yeah, well, the next question is favourite recording.
Yeah, that's easier, yeah. So I got one of his Harlem recordings, which were issued on Chandos, which had sort of things like the big A minor 5/4/3 and other such delights on it. And I just found the combination of music, player, organ, it was just captivating stuff, yeah.
Right, here's an interesting one. Composer who never composed any organ music, but you wish they had.
The one that springs to mind there is Stravinsky, actually, who famously hated the organ. And I'm a big Stravinsky fan. I sort of went to the E&O's production of Rake's Progress some years ago, and will actually sometimes for pleasure put on Rite of Spring. Probably very, very Freudianly revealing. I love listening to so many of it, Symphony of Psalms, Dumbarton Notes. It's some of my sort of go-to listening music just on a day off. So yeah, a great shame for he had a really real prejudice against the organ. I wonder whether that was a sort of very opaque, rather unwieldy sort of 1920s organs that he was encountering in the States at the time. I wonder if he'd been, his eyes had been opened by the organ revival movement and by the next generation of players, whether he might have reconsidered, but he didn't.
We did the Stravinsky Mass setting at New College, Oxford, and all of the wind parts were played on the organ. It was a miserable experience.
Do you play that from a vocal reduction?
I can't remember. Yeah, I think we did write something down that got in as many parts as possible, but it's not possible to play it all.
No, I have played that before, but a really striking piece, very haunting piece,
cool.
very cool, and just not quite what you expect. And that's the other fascinating with Stravinsky, just a man of so many different faces in his lifetime, and each of them really compelling as well. I'd love to meet him, but whether he'd like to meet me, I don't know.
I'm sure.
It was quite a strong flavour, I think he was.
Right, next question. Cavecol or Harrison and Harrison?
Cavaicol.
That was quick. Evensong or Mass?
Sorry, I have to give an answer, don't I? I don't feel strongly either way, I suppose, because I'm sort of not particularly liturgically minded. But for me, Mass, just because of the wealth of huge wealth of music for it. It's not to say there's not some lovely evensong music, but I think the really good evensong music is probably more limited, isn't it? When you've got the whole of Western civilization.
Back and forth.
Oh, yeah, that aside, obviously. Watson and E as well.
Hey, don't knock Watson and E.
A little reprimand there. I'm not coming back, clearly. This is enjoy this, listeners. This is my only podcast visit.
Vidor or Vienne?
As a teacher, Vienne. As a player, purely because of various considerations, Vidor. So I'm sort of a bit schizophrenic. I think there's wonderful pieces of both. I think Vienne at his highest is a really, really fine composer. And I think one of the finest pieces of French music going into the 20th century is Vienne's piano quintet. Yeah, and the songs as well. I just think he's a really high-end composer. I have to say, sadly, rather like Max Reger, I don't think his best stuff's all for the organ. But I think there's some wonderful stuff for the organ as well. And Vidor, I mean, there's some dross, but there's some mighty fine stuff. I find Vidor it's more audience friendly when you're doing, as is so often the case nowadays, a sort of accessible town hall style programme, which is the bread and butter, I think, of what organists are increasingly expected to perform in public. Yeah.
Reger or Cargelert?
So for my students, Max Reger. Unquestionably, because I think it's very important to know he's a highly significant figure in German organ culture. For me as a performer and listener, Cargelert, who I think is a really undersold talent and very interesting talent. And of course, he and Reger fell out massively in Leipzig, having once been sort of drinking partners. And I wonder whether Reger just saw a new kid on the block with sort of cosmopolitan, accent and rather eccentric clothes, and perhaps decided to take against him. But I think Cargelert is due a serious renaissance. And it's sort of slowly happening in Germany at the moment, I think. And I wonder whether it will hit these shores in due time. Yeah.
Howells or Stanford?
Stanford. That was easier.
Bach or Messiaen?
Bach, yeah.
You'd be surprised. I've had some interesting answers to that one so far.
Okay, it's I'm assuming you're asking just sort of purely personally directed, aren't you? And then sometimes you have your own sort of peccadillos, and then sometimes as a teacher you sometimes have to do something that is perhaps not entirely to your taste either, but in terms of listening, performing, thinking, always Bach. Yeah, always.
And then finally, socks or shoes?
I get more excited. Oh, careful what I say. I get more excited about socks. Can I rephrase that? I'll say that. I'd say that, socks are really interesting because you'll often find some really wacky socks as you go about, whereas shoes are functional. And maybe it's because I'm the male of a species, but I don't really notice or care about them.
Okay. I was actually talking about sort of playing the organ.
I thought it was like I thought it was like a random end of podcast. Like, let's open this up. Oh, I see. Yeah.
Actually, I remember coming to you for an organ lesson back when I was about 18, and I played something to you in my socks. And I remember you said, "Don't come back to me without shoes," and I didn't. I'm really sorry.
What a git! Yeah, I don't. I mean, I know you're a sock wearer, aren't you, Ben? And you play the organ fantastically. So let's not sort of create dogma about it. Personally, I'd always encourage people to wear shoes as a point of technique, partially to protect the feet, but I think everyone finds their own routes of things, don't they? And it's his means to an end, isn't it? But I'd always encourage shoes. Having said that, when I practice my delicious digital organ at home, it's not really delicious. I tend to wear socks or slippers just because the pedal action's very light, and the neighbours had just said one or two slightly loaded things in the flat below. So I learned that organ shoes don't go down terribly well if you're practising at 10 p.m. at night. Yeah.
Let's move on to our regular item, Organ Heaven and Organ Hell. Every week, my guest enthuses about a composer or a piece of music, then chucks another piece right under the bus. My job is to try and play devil's advocate and attempt to understand their views, or else try and change them to align with my own, although that seldom works very well. We're going to start with Heaven. Dan, you're pretty angelic anyway, so what do you hear in your own head when you walk about on a daily basis?
I think the soundtrack to my life, when I'm being well behaved at any rate, is the Bach F major toccata 540. I think with nearly everyone, there's personal associations of any favourite piece, aren't there? And for me, I remember hearing that as a young boy on a old cassette, gosh, show my age there, and it just absolutely had me hooked, just mesmerising, everything about it, both the imitation at the beginning, the pedal solo, the virtuosity, and then just as you sort of feel that you've got into a groove, he completely deflects everything with those flattened bass notes that take you on another ride of a roller coaster. There was just something I found actually really elating about that. And it also mystified me as I got older, because I started trying to read about it. And I think when you feel really emotionally connected to a piece of music, we all want to understand everything about it, find out everything about it. And no one actually knows what it's about. And there's various theories. The 7 days of creation is fascinating, but we just don't know. So it remains an enigma. I'm also fascinated by the fact that he signs BACH every time the harmony is diverted. You know, what personal significance is that within the course of the piece? Again, there are theories about it. We just don't know. But it just, I can leave my intellect at the door with the music and just absorb it and just be absolutely thrilled. I've heard so many different performances of it. I have a very broad view on all sorts of things with it, such as tempo and just pacing and all sorts of things, because I think the music transcends that. And I think that's it with Bach. You know, it can withstand so many different approaches, and everybody wants to sort of claim ownership of a certain way of approaching it. I think one of the good things in recent years is become much more open-minded, and that, you know, we can now have a plethora of approaches which can be completely contradictory, but as long as they want to serve the music and not the musician performing them, then there's room for lots of them. And I find that with 540 as well. It's so many different takes on it in terms of projection, tempo, you know, all sorts of details which will be approached differently. Yeah.
Right, well, immediately you've rendered this item moot, as I'm meant to dispute your choice and call it rubbish, but there's no arguing with Bach, really. I mean, I was talking with a colleague recently, and we wondered if the older organists they tend to play more Bach in recitals just because it takes less time to register than, say, a piece of Howells, so you can actually spend more time playing the music and less time doing the admin.
It's a really... I'm not at that point yet, but I applaud people who do. I suppose so much performing, you know, you feel a sort of moral weight to have a really varied diet. I'm not talking necessarily an eclectic programme, but something which you almost feel there's an expectation that you're going to be colourful in terms of sounds and in terms of textures. I'm not saying that Bach's not, but I think maybe the times when you can play only Bach in an organ concert are sadly more limited, at least in the UK. And it's getting the organs with them as well, where you can deliver that one.
Well, I suppose it's a more contemporary view of Baroque music in general that you play a piece on all one registration. Do you subscribe to that?
Not wholly, no. And I think there's, and this is complex, I think there are strong arguments that might have been a sort of prevailing approach in Bach's own lifetime. But a lot of the definite evidence is anecdotal, and it's relying on people after Bach's death relaying information as well. I won't bore the listener with the geeky detail, but it's amazing how a lot of our thoughts on that, they're not as concrete as a lot of people shouting about historical performance practice would make you believe. And actually a lot of stuff about things like playing a Bach preludium through on one sound it wouldn't stand up in a court of law if you showed the evidence. You then, of course, got playing traditions to bear in mind. You've got the strength of the musical logic that lots of changes of colour might be distracting. But I think gone are the days when we can't find creative solutions. And thankfully, gone are the days when we have to defend it with, a sentence from a treatise that is pretty thin in the first place. There are people who still do that, but it's not a school of thought I find very creative. I think it actually sort of stifles people musically as well.
Do you go for the line that we should only play Bach with toes?
No, I think, again, there's evidence that, that it was perhaps a predominantly toes-only culture, but there are so many exceptions, even from a Bach student like Kittel. I also think as well that when you're playing an organ not at Bach's time, we instinctively use heels anyway as part of a technique, and it can actually get in the way for a lot of players to try and have two different techniques. And if that's at any point hindering your musical communication, then it's putting the pedagogy before the music, isn't it? Yeah. I do like toes only because I think it makes me think like a gamba player or a violona player, or try to anyway. So I get a more, a more stylish line that way. And it's more instinctive on organs of the time, I agree, but I become less and less pedagogical as I get older because it's all means to an end, isn't it?
There was an April Fool's joke going around a few years ago that some research had been carried out that proved Bach would have been played with all heels.
Which are reflection.
Who knows?
It's not funny at all, even if you're not an organist. And even if you are an organist, it's not so funny.
No.
Anyway.
So yeah, BWV 540, the pedal solo is quite impressive, but I just wonder if it's a bit of a one-trick pony. I confess I don't play it myself, to my great shame, but if I had to pick gripes with it, I'd say it's a bit overblown.
It certainly doesn't. Yeah, everything's explored, doesn't it? I'm sure I could justify other big pieces of Bach which are perhaps more motivically interesting, dare I say, or varied, or a little bit tighter structurally. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm being honest and saying I think there's a lot of there's nostalgia in this as well as the fact I do think it's a very fine piece of music. It speaks to me, and I think okay, maybe it's not if we're quibbling in the sort of absolute top few of the sort of Bach organ oeuvre, but I don't know. I can't divorce that from my personal association.
Well, here you go. I did a video about my top 10 Bach organ works where I spent far too long editing my own blooming mouth onto a static picture of Bach. Very quickly, if you had to choose, what would your top 3 Bach organ pieces be?
Top 3? Gosh. Okay, so we've established 540. I'm allowed that, am I? Yeah. Is this as a performer or as a listener or both? Because they're slightly different, aren't they?
As a performer.
Yeah. But the reason I say that is I love performing 532, the D major, and I don't think it's the strongest piece at all. I mean, even for young Bach, it's for sort of flimsy moments. The Spielfuge is fascinating, but the Preludium is, it's somebody learning a craft a bit, isn't it? I mean, Bach sometimes in his younger days wasn't the fully formed product. So I don't think 532 is one of his most distinguished works, but I love it to play. And audiences like it, but maybe I'm a risk taker. So as a performer, that would definitely be up in the top 3. And again, thinking as a performer and not a listener, something I've not performed for a while is Zeiger Grüße, another early piece actually. Yeah. And again, very fine. It's not, again, the absolutely stunning art of, the E minor 548, is it? Or even 544 B minor, or more mature Leipzig pieces. But it's perhaps it's the variety of what can be done with the chorale, the beauty of the writing, the succinctness of it. And again, I always, as a performer, I always have my audiences in mind. And that's nice because it's digestible chunks, isn't it? Yeah. Apart from that penultimate variation, everything's very modest in length. And you can change colours. So even if you're not playing on an organ, which is brilliant, or that's not brilliant for Bach, there's so many ways you can find around it. So it's a bit of a cop-out, isn't it? No, but that's purely off the top of my head. I think that would be my top 3 performer ones. Yeah.
Now, I'm afraid there's been a bit of an administrative error on the part of St. Peter, and you've ended up in hell. Sorry.
I can't, Ben. This is just. I mean, this is beyond the bounds of believable. But go on, let's run with it for the sake of your podcast. Yeah.
What's on the boombox down there for you?
on St. Peter, on Satan's boombox is Grunenwald.
Grunenwald. Okay. Right. I don't mind admitting I don't know the first thing about Grunenwald. I mean, quite honestly, I thought he was a character from Harry Potter.
Right. I've done.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Some extensive research.
Can I just say that if that wasn't allowed, there's quite a large amount of later Dupre that could equally be playing 24/7. But we'll go with Grunenwald for now.
So I've done some extensive research for all the time my budget allows, which is about 7 minutes. And he was the organist of Saint-Sulpice, taking over from Dupre. He recorded the complete Bach organ works. And of course, he's got a very large compositional output, including quite a lot of film music. So what is it about it?
Listen, I'm sure, I don't want to obsess anybody. I'm sure as a musician, he was wonderful. I'm sure he's a lovely man. It's purely the organ compositions I've heard. I just want to reclaim that bit of my life. So I will be asking St. Peter for a refund of the 15 minutes or so over my teaching career that I've heard Grunenwald, yeah.
I listened to a few pieces. One was called Adoratio, which was quite pleasant, actually, fairly inoffensive. And then I found the Sonata for organ, which is in 3 movements, clocking in about 20 minutes.
Did you enjoy that as well, did you?
Heavy-going stuff.
Oh, okay.
I think the problem I had with it was that it was all just a bit nebulous, some interesting ideas in a vacuum for sure. But on a first listening, I found it really tricky to connect with. Perhaps I just need to soak it in a bit more.
I guess it's this line, this particularly sort of French line between improvisation and notation, isn't it? That's something which might be quite right for the moment. Suddenly, when it gets fleshed out and put down on paper, it's just a little bit patchy in its inspiration. I mean, some people might go so far as to say, some people, Ben, might go so far to say something like the Dupre Symphony Passion exhibits a bit of that, even though it's probably more through composed than improvised. Just sort of patchy inspiration, things not developed quite as well as they might do. But yeah, maybe I'm just a bit German in my sort of taste and thinking, but I just find this constant nebulous sort of clouds of things where you're just meant to be swept along by the French organ colours. It's musically a bit weak. I also think with stuff like, and it's not just Grunenwald, there's other French composers maybe where only organists really enjoy it because it's such a specific sound world and reliant so much on the organ colour. And if other musicians don't understand or access that worries me a little bit. I think we're getting into the music of cults a bit.
Yes, yeah.
Perhaps any Grunenwald fans in the audience, there must be some, can write in with their suggestions.
Please don't send hate mail.
No, don't.
I'm very fragile, really.
He's got a degree in architecture.
Has he really?
Yeah.
There we go.
So
Fascinating guy.
Well, it does make you think, I like to ask this question to organists. If you weren't an organist, what would you be?
Based on childhood thoughts or just generally?
I mean,
when I was growing up, I really wanted to be a dentist because I was fascinated by the pink mouthwash they gave you to swell your mouth out at the end. So I'm not sure I still want to be a dentist. But if tomorrow I couldn't do anything musically, if I was forbidden from any of that, there's nothing else really leaps out. I've always enjoyed writing, but I don't think I'm good enough to write a novel. But I do enjoy writing as part of my job if I'm having to write a report or a proposal. I do enjoy, and I enjoy reading good literature as well. So maybe it's something I'd develop, but I suspect I wouldn't be very good at it. And whatever skills I may or may not have as a musician, it might be a bit painful to, try and be a writer and then realise that you're not very good. But maybe I'd give it a whirl. What about you, Ben? Am I allowed to turn that back?
Yeah.
What do you do?
I'd probably just take a brisk walk head on into oncoming traffic. Now, I've been trawling the darkest corners of the internet in organ forums no sane person should have to visit for the most inconsequential and trivial of anecdotes I can form into questions for my guest. That's right, it's the weekly lull in the show that no one looks forward to. It's quiz time.
Hey.
This is basically like a pub quiz, Dan, but there's no beer or sticky floor, and the questions aren't about Ronaldo or Girls Aloud.
What a prospect.
But rather about organs. Let's get going. Number 1. You've done extensive research and filming about English organs,
Yes.
but I wonder if you know which of the following composers has an organ work as their opus 1. A. Kenneth Layton, B. Herbert Howells, or C. Edward Elgar.
That's something that I really feel I should know. And I don't. I think it's going to be... I'm going to go wild card and say Leighton, even though he wasn't an organist.
Great. Well, I've got a bit of a confession to make on this one. I'll just read you my pre-prepared answer first. Elgar's Opus 1 is a romance for violin and piano.
Yes.
His Vespers Voluntaries are Opus 14 and the Sonata is Opus 28. For Leighton, we have to wait until Opus 41 for the Prelude, Scherzo and Passacaglia. So the answer, I thought, was Howells, whose very first published organ work is the Sonata No. 1 in C minor, which not many people play.
No.
You can tell it's young Howells. It's obviously not quite as refined as the later stuff, goes without saying, but all the hallmarks are there.
So that was Opus 1?
Well, 5 minutes before we started recording, I pulled my copy off the shelf, and to my great horror, it said Opus 2 on the front. So I'm annoyed with myself about that, but I couldn't find a catalogue of his opus numbers anywhere online, so let's just say, between you, me and the doorpost.
It is
Opus
probably... Well,
Okay, fine. Good, all right. We got it wrong anyway.
so that one, yeah, good.
Number 2.
In one of your films, you play the oldest playable organ in the UK, the 1744 Renatus Harris in St Botolph's Aldgate.
I'm terribly sorry, Ben. It's the 1680-something organ at Adlington Hall, which I only played briefly because it was behaving really badly on the day, sadly. So we were only able to...
1684.
Yeah, thereabouts. I'm not sure if we know the exact date, but it's post-restoration anyway. So sorry. Does that ruin the whole quiz? Is the quiz over? Can I go now? No.
Question 2. In one of your films... In one of your films... No, right, let's do this again. Right.
Question 2. In one of your films, you play the oldest playable organ in the UK, the 1684 Adlington Hall organ. But what is the oldest playable organ in the world?
Oh, it's in Switzerland. Oh, sorry.
Right, you've got to hear the
Go on.
answers.
Yep, sorry.
A.
The Van Kovelen organ in the Lawrence Kirk in Alkmaar. B. The Basilica of Villers in Zion, Switzerland. C. St Valentine's Church in Kiedrich.
Yeah, it's B.
B. Yes, that's correct.
Not played it. Have you?
No, I haven't, no. There's a video of Diane Bish playing it, though.
It's the joy of music.
Yeah.
Joy of Diane Bish.
It's on top of a hill in a massive fortified castle. It looks like a Bond villain hideout. It's really impressive. The organ's not totally original. It's got 12 pipes which date back to 1435, which is absolutely incredible. To think this predates Bach and Bird and Svelink.
Yeah.
The Van Kovelen organ in Alkmaar is the oldest organ in the Netherlands, dating back to 1511.
That is a exquisite
Yeah, do you want to gush about it for a minute?
Oh,
I know
yes,
you love it,
please.
yeah.
Oh, I just absolutely adore it. And I remember listening to it the first time I went to Alkmaar, and I think it had just been restored at the time. And, I mean, it just fills the room. And you could almost be forgiven for thinking that you were listening to the main organ, if it's not for the fact it doesn't quite have the extra bit of gravity that it is just sensational, yeah.
I played the bridge organ in Christchurch Spitalfields recently, and I found it really eye-opening and instructive for early music, but also quite terrifying because the pedal goes down to G below bottom C and everything just feels like it's in the wrong place.
Yes.
Anyway, there you go. Question 3. I feel like we might need a klaxon for this question because I think, honestly, it's the nerdiest question I've ever come up with. In the UK, we love a good open diapason. It's the real roast beef and potatoes type of stop that fills you up.
Dear Ben, you're not worthy of this. Yeah.
Which of these organs has the most open diapasons of 8-foot pitch?
Now, can I just say, I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't know it. Because if I do know it, then, what tiny scrap of street cred I might have just nosedives. And if I don't know it, then your listeners are going to be equally appalled. So I'm absolutely damned on. So let's go for it.
The question is open diapasons of 8-foot pitch only. So if there's any 16-foot open diapason, it doesn't count. And it's not just on the grate, it's the whole organ.
Oh, right, okay.
So A, Durham Cathedral. B, Liverpool Anglican Cathedral. Or C, St Paul's Cathedral.
Now, obviously, you're meant to say Liverpool Cathedral, of it being the largest or second largest in the UK, whatever it is now. And then you're thinking that St Paul's Cathedral is probably larger than Durham Cathedral. I'm guessing. I don't know Durham well, because St Paul's has got the dome section. 8 foot, but then that's only 1 or 2 opens in the dome. It is a fascinating, actually, Ben. This is an absolute Bobby Dazzler of a question. I think it's a trap because I have a vague recollection, having only played at Durham once 10 years ago or so, that there are a lot of diapasons on the grate. So there's a family of sort of Arthur Harrison diapasons there, and there's a positive division. I think it's going to be the outsider, which is Durham, and it's going to surprise everyone.
Okay.
I'm going to go for Durham.
Now everyone's switched off.
So yeah, that was such a boring answer. I'm so sorry.
Well, let me tell you.
Durham has 6, 2 on the swell, 4 on the grate.
4, right.
Liverpool, 7, 1 on the swell, 5 on the grate, 1 on central. St Paul's Cathedral is the winner here with 8. 8 8-foot open diapasons across all the divisions of the organ. 2 on the grate, 1 on the swell, 1 on the south choir, 1 on the solo, 2 on the 5th manual, and 1 on the west section.
Oh, of course. Oh.
If it's of interest, the Royal Albert Hall and Sydney Town Hall also have 7 each. But St Paul's wins with 8, so it just begs the question, really, how many open diapasons is too many? Well, the answer is apparently 9.
I just wish this podcast could go on forever because it's just hours of family fun, isn't it?
We're nearly there, don't we?
Question 4. You were the organist at Coventry Cathedral for a while. It's obviously a very historic building, and of course it was bombed in the Second World War, which destroyed the Father Willis organ that was in there. A new organ was put in by Harrison and Harrison in 1962, which is a very well-respected instrument, as some might say it toes the line between the classical principles of Ralph Downs and the more romantic sound of your typical English organ. The organ was a gift from the people of what nation? A. Norway, B. Finland, or C. Sweden?
There is the Norwegian government gave money for a chamber organ in there, and the Canadian government gave money towards the Harrison organ. So it's A, but not as we know it.
Right, I need to do more research.
You know, when
Apparently it's known as the Norwegian organ, which was...
there's a separate Norwegian organ. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. Do you want to rephrase it? No.
But the main organ is very striking, isn't it? I mean, I've got it on a cover of a volume of modern organ music from the 70s.
Oh, yes, yeah. I've got a couple of those, yeah. Right. And it all started from an architect's sketch because he didn't quite know what to do, so he just put some pipes at the East End. And and part of the success of the organ is because it's quite shallow, because the architect Basil Spence was really mean about accommodating space for it, and he very begrudgingly called the space Harrison's 10 feet or something. It was there's a classic sort of spat between architect and organ builder, but ironically I think that was to the organ's advantage, because had it been put in that sort of typical Oxford position, as it were, in a side aisle somewhere in a great big cavernous chamber that doesn't project down the main building, I don't think it would sound as well as it does by any means. So actually, ironically, Spence did a favour by just, almost having it as an afterthought at the East End, either side, yeah.
And finally, question 5. The 19th century Las Piñas organ in St. Joseph's Church in the Philippines is home to a unique instrument in that its pipes are made out of what material? A. Glass, B. Bamboo, or C. Papier-mâché?
It is B, Ben.
Do you know about it?
Yeah, I've somebody lent me a book years ago about it, because I think it was restored by Clyce or somebody.
Yeah, well, incredibly, it dates back to 1824 and was built over 6 years by Father Diego Serra, the first Catholic priest in the town. It's a place that's unfortunately been hit quite often by earthquakes and things, but they have an annual international bamboo organ festival.
Wow. Have you been invited yet?
Not yet, but it's a massive draw for the local community and general organ enthusiasts.
And what music can you play on it?
I think it's got about 20 stops or so on it, so it's sort of Spanish style from the 1820s.
Okay, so, and a pedal division, so you could play sort of classical music at, just before Mendelssohn maybe even.
Yeah, so it's got a very distinctive sound, but no, it's not glass or papier-mâché.
Yeah, that's so tempting.
Well, at the end of that, Dan, you scored some points.
Well done. Well, I just to be honest, I mean, you could basically have 5 out of 5.
Right, well, that sounds like as good a place as any to wrap up our conversation. I need to go and take that 3-hour nap now. Before we sign off, Dan, is there anything else you'd like to mention or any products you want to shamelessly shill?
Any shameless plugs? I don't think so, no, except... I hope that I have the pleasure of meeting your listeners if I've not done so already.
I don't think you want to do that, no.
No, oh, really?
No, all right.
I take that back, yeah. But no, I just think it's great to have an organ podcast. I've heard podcasts on all sorts of fascinating things, from various obscure sort of Scotch whiskies to, wannabe pop artists. So,
well, this can join the ranks of niche.
Yeah, niche, but then, niche can become mainstream, can't it? And I think that's all I hope for the organ, isn't it? How does niche become mainstream but without selling the product short? It's a lifetime's work, isn't it?
In which case, this is usually the point where I construct increasingly elaborate ways to extract a soundbite out of my guests to trumpet the quality of this podcast. I've not had time to do that this week, so could you just say one of the following for me, please?
Yes.
The Chiff Chat podcast is excellent, acceptable, tedious, totally unrecommendable. Delete as appropriate.
The Chiff Chat podcast is excellent. Yeah! Essential listening.
So do you see what I mean? Dan's energy is just so infectious, he ought to come with a health warning. I'm very, very grateful to Dan for giving up his time. He's a phenomenal teacher, animateur, and performer, actually. If you ever get the chance to hear him live, make sure you do. So that's another podcast. Please do write to me. It's very lonely here in this cramped little swell box in which I live. It makes my day when I hear the inbox ping on podcast@chiffchat.com. What I'd really like to hear from you is your opinion on the weirdest organ piece you've ever come across. Here's mine. It's a piece by Argentinian-German experimental absurdist composer Maurizio Cargol. If you don't know, this is the guy who's known for writing pieces that are more like theatre performances, where the artist has to make certain faces while they play, or use unconventional things as instruments, like a toilet or an enema, of all things. You could argue that it blurs the lines of what music can be, or you could also reasonably argue that it's all just a bit silly, really. But Cargill did write some more conventional pieces of music for orchestral instruments, including one for solo organ, which is called rrrr. That's 8 R's in a row, followed by an ellipsis. The reason for this is that all 8 pieces start with the letter R, but I love that that's what he called it. And the music is similarly quirky. If you can, try and look out the recording by Dominik Sustek. Granted, he performs it on an organ that's got a lot of percussion stops, but I've never ever heard an organ sound like this. It's absolutely incredible. Special shout out to the movement called Ragtime Waltz, which sounds like a demented fairground ride that's been possessed by a circus ringleader. So there you go, there's your homework for this week. Let me know if you can find anything weirder. podcast@chiffchat.com. Donate on Tipjar. Oh no, I'm being swallowed up by the outro music. Right, see you next week. Bye.